Closet, a Todd Mills mystery. Book 1. Author R.D. Zimmerman. Publisher Scribble Pub, Minneapolis, Minnesota. Narrator Eric Aust. Chapter 2. In a dimly lit parking lot along Highway 494, the Strip, as it had been known since its heyday back in the disco 70s. Todd Mills stood next to his dark green Grand Cherokee, frozen in place. He stared up at the bright lights of a billboard. It was a faceless area, well beyond the edge of Minneapolis, with fast food restaurants and car dealerships and strip malls lined up along the broad ribbon of concrete. Yet the face that Todd Mills was focused on, the one blown up to superhuman size and pictured in the spotlight billboard above the highway, was extraordinarily familiar. It was a photo of a man, early 40s, light brown hair with a handsome smile and a noticeably square jaw. A face Todd saw not only on billboards, but in print ads, on television, and even in the bathroom mirror as he shaved each morning. He should have been beaming with smug pride. He was famous, at least in the upper Midwest, and in town it seemed that everyone knew his name and face, particularly now, not even a month after the awards, is reiterated by the words beneath the enormous photo. Channel 7 salutes our guy, investigative reporter Todd Mills, winner of 2 Emmys. This was his time in the stars, yet now that he had attained what he'd worked so hard for, he feared the old maxim was proving true. Be careful of what you wish for, because this was going to make his life infinitely more complicated. If he could have gone back and done his career all over again, he would have done it quite differently. Why hadn't he seen until now how much he was screwing up along the way? Why hadn't he understood how difficult winning the Emmys was going to make things? He took his beeper from the pocket of his dark blue wool sport coat and flicked it off, which was decidedly against policy. But he didn't care. Not tonight. He was lead reporter on the Crime Eye team, and the whole angle was to not report on a crime that had already taken place, but if at all possible to get there while the crime was actually taking place. The ideal had caught on, too, in a big way. Angry citizens, frustrated that the police and the law just couldn't do enough, had begun to call the Crime Eye number witness, in the hopes that a theft or a murder could be captured live by Channel 7's cameras. It was a good idea that proved more than just interesting or shocking. People were finding the show not only titillating, but empowering. It was providing them with a means to do something about the crime that was rampaging through their neighborhoods. While Todd and his crew had gone on many wild goose chases, they had also provided footage of crimes that had led to 9 convictions, 2 of which had earned Todd his Emmys. So he should have had the beeper on. But he just couldn't do it this evening. Couldn't go to some suburban apartment complex or some inner city corner and try to dig up some dirt. Right now, his own life was fucked up enough. As he stuffed the deactivated pager back into his pocket, he wondered if he hadn't lost it. That compulsive hunger to scoop a story. This past week it had felt as if it were gone forever. He shook his head, knowing in his gut that winning the Emmys was forcing him to confront a decision he'd dreaded. A decision that could mean the end of his career on television. But if he couldn't do any broadcast work, what would he do with his life? He strolled across the parking lot, his breath steaming in the night air. The weight of so many years of deceit hung on his back, and he made his way into a chain restaurant where a syrupy hostess greeted him. "Good evening, sir. And how are you this evening?" "I'll take the booth in the far corner," he replied. "Oh, sure." She looked at him strangely, as if she couldn't quite place how or where she knew him, and led him through the crowded restaurant to the distant inn. With a broad, white smile, she handed him a plastic-coated menu and sweetly told him his server would be with him in a moment. "Enjoy your meal," she said, her gaze lingering a moment too long. As was happening more and more, Todd noted a few heads turned his way, so he sat with his back to the main part of the restaurant. He had way too much on his mind to be civil. Except when he was sent out here to do a story, he avoided this part of town, which distinguished itself from the freeways of Chicago or Dallas only by the intensity of the winter cold. Tonight, though, he'd finished his story hours ahead of schedule, yet couldn't bear to go home. He was so confused that he just couldn't make himself return to the empty place. So he kept going and going, driving on and wanting to get away, to flee from himself and this world he'd so carefully constructed over the past 20 plus years. He'd cranked up the radio, gotten on some freeway, and somehow ended up out here, an impersonal land of concrete and mindless shopping malls. Turning around, he scanned the restaurant in search of a waitress. Beyond the red vinyl booths, he saw the hostess and a couple of waitresses huddled and talking. One of them looked at him, said something to the others, and started in his direction. Todd glanced quickly at his menu, wondering at the same time if they'd been back there talking about him. "Good evening, sir," said the waitress, a young blonde woman with too much enthusiasm. "Hi, I'd like... How are you this evening?" "Fine, thank you." "Tonight's special is just a bowl of chili and coffee, please. Regular or decaf? If he were born and bred Minnesotan, he would have had the real stuff. But he wasn't. Decaf." Oh, sure." She hesitated, seemed as if she was about to say something else, then scurried off. Todd leaned forward, bowed his head into his hands, and contemplated not only what he'd been doing all his life, but what had gotten him into this predicament in the first place. Ever since he'd gone into broadcast journalism. He'd taken his first job at a public television station in Peoria, Illinois, just 2 weeks after getting his degree from Northwestern University. He'd had but one agenda, the top, and all along he'd done everything that it took to get there. From going to the gym 3 times a week to recently dyeing his green hair to being there front and ready for any story at any time of day, no matter if it was only a cat in distress. His former wife had said his ambition was what caused the divorce, but of course that hadn't been the case. The waitress reappeared, placing a cup and a thermos pitcher in front of him. She smiled, took a couple of creamers from a pouch tied around her waist, and slid them across the table. "Say," she started, "aren't you—" Her words trailed off as she nodded out the window. He glanced to his left, looked past the parking lot at that friggin' billboard. "Yeah, that's me." She giggled, blushed, and said, "Oh, that's what we thought. The other girls and me. Gee, I've seen you on the TV, too. Cool. I don't think there's ever been a celebrity in here before." "Oh?" Such notoriety and adoration was all he'd wanted before, but now he understood what one worn-out television personality had once told him. "Buddy," he'd said, "the difference between being famous and not is the difference between making a conversation and having one." And he'd been totally right. Todd realized, for there was no way he could tell this young woman to hush up and get him his food. The waitress hovered, asking, "Are you out here to do some exposé or something?" She glanced around nervously. "Wow, like the television crew isn't going to burst through the doors and start filming a crime or something, is it?" "There really isn't much going on here. Our kitchen's really clean, too. The health inspector was just here. I mean, he even ate here, and he paid. I took his money." Her eyes opened wide. "Oh my God, like you don't think we're about to be robbed or anything, do you?" No, not at all. I'm not here to do a story." He caught his breath, clenched his jaw, and as politely as he could at this particular time said, "I'm just here to have a nice, quiet meal." "Well then, did you just come from something? You do a lot of the murder stuff, don't you? Was there another murder? Someone said there was a shooting out of the Mega Mall again." "No, not that I know of." Unable to keep up any pretense, his smile vanished. "God, it's so cool that you're here, and I'm waiting on you." You don't suppose my order's ready, do you? What? Would you get my chili? Oh, yeah, your chili. Oh, sure, she said, turning and practically bouncing off. He turned away, gazed outside at the huge image of himself. What had he been hoping? What had he wanted out of life? He'd been in therapy for over a year now, discussing every aspect of his childhood in a Polish neighborhood in Chicago, and his shrink was right. He didn't seek simply mass appeal, but mass approval. That was his secret fuel, the one that kept him going when things looked beyond hopeless. And then again, hadn't his father, a one-time medical student who'd immigrated to America after World War II and ended up a laborer in an automobile parts plant, also sought such a thing? Of course, that was where Todd had learned it. It was his father, after all, who'd changed the family name from Milkowski to Mills. It was his dad who had pushed Todd as well. Pushed and pushed, criticizing Todd when his grades weren't at the top, chastising him when he flubbed on the football team, and telling Todd whenever he simply wasn't good enough. For he'd been certain his boy, Todd, was to be the family hero, soaring to the highest heights in the new world. Well, even though his dad had died 4 years ago, Todd had made it to those heights. Yesterday, Stella, his agent, had called, informing him of what Todd already knew. Channel 7 was not just thrilled with Todd Mills, they were in love with him. And Todd Mills wasn't going merely to the top of Channel 7. He was going all the way. Big time. The Nationals would take notice of him now, said Stella, with complete conviction. The snowball had started rolling when Todd was nominated for the Emmys, and then barreled along when he'd won them both. One for the report on the cop killing, the other for the report on that murdered kid. So now Channel 7 was about to offer him the anchor position, the one that would be opening up on the 6 p.m. news. He'd already filled in several times, proved that he could handle it with aplomb. So when the fabled Dave Ness, who'd already been anchor for a generation, retired, Todd Mills would step in and fill the legend. An announcement was to be made by the end of the week, and a publicity party was already in the works. A year or two there, Stella said, and then he'd be on his way to no CNN for you, she had said. Doll, you're going all the way. CBS, NBC, ABC. What's the diff? Shit, thought Todd, as he waited for that bowl of chili. How could he be so dumb? How could they? He'd hidden so long behind the word divorced, played up that image of the dashing jock reporter, his beautiful friend, Janice Gray, a high-powered attorney always on his arm, that he'd caught himself in a trap of his own making. He had to tell them now, blurted out to his boss at the station. It wasn't too late, not in the grand scheme of things. Todd eyed the waitress, who was coming toward him with a beaming grin and a steaming bowl. Suddenly he knew he wouldn't be able to eat. In a burst of resolution, he scooted out of the booth, took $10 and slapped it down on the table. For the first time in his life, he knew what he had to do, saw it before him with astonishing clarity. There it was, right in front of him, the cloud of fear finally lifting and exposing the answer. There was still time to fix things. Absolutely. Last night, they'd had a terrible fight. Last night, he'd been certain that there was no other recourse but to break it off. But that wasn't right. Of course not. Love was love, and full of a giddy kind of excitement, he rushed out of the restaurant, surprisingly eager not only to apologize to Michael Carter, his secret lover of 4 years now, but to let Michael know that he was ready to come out of the closet. There was no other choice, none at all. Tonight, he'd make up with Michael, and tomorrow, he was going to go to tell Channel 7 that he, Todd Mills, was queer. Gay Mysteries audiobooks. I think it is easy to hate a label, but a face humanizes the word. So this effort is twofold. To offer comfort to those like myself that your world didn't end because you don't fit into the view of acceptable society on both sides. And in hopes of helping those with family that are LGBTQ, that it doesn't mean we are aliens from the child they once knew. reassure them so they can maybe be supportive at the same time and being true to their values.